If you love reading or just prefer to listen, welcome to John Smeaton's Regular Reads.
Hello again, hope we're all keeping well. We're on to chapters 4 and 5 of Darren Shan's Cirque de Freak. Right then. Chapter 4. The freak show was all I could think about that night. I tried forgetting it, but couldn't. Not even when I was watching my favourite TV shows. It sounded so weird. A snake boy, a wolf man, a performing spider. I was especially excited by the spider. Mum and Dad didn't notice anything was up, but Annie did. Annie is my younger sister. She can be a bit annoying, but most of the time she's cool. She doesn't run to Mum telling tales if I misbehave, and she knows how to keep a secret. "What's wrong with you?" she asked after dinner. We were alone in the kitchen washing up. "Nothing's wrong," I said. "Yes, there is," she said. "You've been behaving funny all night." I knew she'd keep asking until she got the truth, so I told her about the freak show. "Sounds great," she agreed, "but there's no way you'd get in." "Why not?" I asked. "I bet they don't let children in. It sounds like a grown-up sort of show." "They probably wouldn't let a brat like you in," I said nastily, "but me and the others would be okay." That upset her. So, I apologised. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean that. I'm just annoyed because you're probably right. Annie, I'd give anything a go." "I've got a makeup kit I could lend you," she said. "You can draw on wrinkles and stuff. It'd make you look older." I smiled and gave her a big hug, which is something I don't do very often. "Thanks, sis," I said, "but it's okay. If we get in, we get in. If we don't, we don't." We didn't say much after that. We finished drying and hurried into the TV room. Dad got back home a few minutes later. He works on building sites all over the place, so he's often late. He's grumpy sometimes, but was in a good mood that night and swung Annie around in a circle. "Anything exciting happen today?" he asked, after he'd said hello to Mum and given her a kiss. "I scored another hat-trick at lunch," I told him. "Really?" he said. "That's great, well done." We turned the TV down while Dad was eating. He likes peace and quiet when he eats, and often asks us questions or tells us about his day at work. Later, Mum went to her room to work on her stamp albums. She's a serious stamp collector. I used to collect too, when I was younger and more easily amused. I popped up to see if she had any new stamps with exotic animals or spiders on them. She hadn't. While I was there, I sounded her out about freak shows. "Mum," I said, "have you ever been to a freak show?" "A what?" she asked, concentrating on the stamps. "A freak show," I repeated, "with bearded ladies and wolfmen and snake boys." She looked up at me and blinked. "A snake boy?" she asked. "What on earth's a snake boy?" "It's a..." I stopped when I realised I didn't know. "Well, that doesn't matter," I said. "Have you ever been to one?" She shook her head. "No, they're illegal." "If there weren't," I said, "and one came to town, would you go?" "No," I said, shivering. "Those sorts of things frighten me. Besides, I don't think it would be fair on the people in the show." "What do you mean?" I asked. "How would you like it," she said, "if you were stuck in a cage for people to look at?" "I'm not a freak," I said huffily. "I know," she laughed and kissed the top of my head. "You're my little angel." "Mum, don't," I grumbled, wiping my forehead with my hand. "Silly," she smiled, "but imagine you had 2 heads or 4 arms and somebody stuck you on show for people to make fun of. You wouldn't like that, would you?" "No," I said, shuffling my feet. "Anyway, what's all this about a freak show?" she asked. "Have you been staying up late watching horror films?" "No," I said. "Because you know your dad doesn't like you watching." "I wasn't staying up late, okay," I shouted. "It's really annoying when parents don't listen." "Okay, Mr. Grumpy," she said. "No need to shout. If you don't like my company, go downstairs and help your father weed the garden." I didn't want to go, but Mum was upset. Mum was upset that I'd shouted at her, so I left and went down to the kitchen. Dad was coming in from the back and spotted me. "So this is where you've been hiding," he chuckled. "Too busy to help the old man tonight?" "I was on my way," I told him. "Too late," he said, taking off his wellies. "I'm finished." I watched him putting on his slippers. He has huge feet. He takes size 12 shoes. When I was younger, he used to stand me on his feet and walk me around. It was like being on 2 long skateboards. What are you doing now? I asked. Writing, he said. My dad had pen pals all over the world, in America, Australia, Russia, and China. He says he likes to keep in touch with his global neighbours, though I think it's just an excuse to go into his study for a nap. Annie was playing with dolls and stuff. I asked if she wanted to come to my room for a game of bed tennis, using a sock for a ball and shoes for rackets, but she was too busy arranging the dolls for a pretend picnic. I went to my room and dragged down my comics. I have loads of cool comics. Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, and Spawn. Spawn's my favourite. He's a superhero who used to be a demon in hell. Some of the Spawn comics are quite scary, but that's why I love them. I spent the rest of the night reading comics and putting them in order. I used to swap with Tommy, who has a huge collection, but he keeps spilling drinks on the covers and crumbs between the pages, so I stopped. Most nights I go to bed by 10, but Mum and Dad forgot about me, and I stayed up until nearly 10:30. Then Dad saw the light in my room and came up. He pretended to be cross, but he wasn't really. Dad doesn't mind too much if I stay up late. Mum's the one who nags me about that. Bed, he said, or I'll never be able to wake you up in the morning. Just a minute, Dad, I told him, while I put my comics away and brushed my teeth. Okay, he said, but make it quick. I stuck the comics into their box and stuffed it back on the shelf over my bed. I put on my pyjamas and went to brush my teeth. I took my time, brushed slowly, and it was almost 11 when I got into bed. I lay back smiling. I felt very tired now. I felt very tired and knew I'd fall asleep in a couple of seconds. The last thing I thought about was the Cirque du Freak. I wondered what a snake boy looked like, and how long the bearded lady's beard was, and what Han's hands and Girth teeth did. Most of all, I dreamed about the spider. Chapter 5. The next morning, Tommy, Alan and me waited outside the gates for Steve, but there was no sign of him by the time the bell rang for class, so we had to go in. I bet he's dozing, Tommy said. He couldn't get the tickets, and now he doesn't want to face us. Steve's not like that, I said. I hope he brings the flyer back, Alan said. Even if we can't go, I'd like to have the flyer. I'd stick it up over my bed and... You couldn't stick it up, stupid, Tommy laughed. Why not? Alan asked. Because Tony would see it, I told him. Oh yeah, Alan said glumly. I was miserable in class. We had geography first, and every time Mrs. Quinn asked a question, I got it wrong. Normally geography is my best subject, because I know so much about it from when I used to collect stamps. Had a late night, Darren? She asked when I got my 15th question wrong. No, Mrs. Quinn, I lied. I think you did, she smiled. There are more bags under your eyes than in the local supermarket. Everybody laughed at that. Mrs. Quinn didn't crack jokes very often, and I did too, even though I was the butt of the joke. The morning dragged, the way it does when you feel let down or disappointed. I spent the time imagining the freak show. I made believe I was one of the freaks, and the owner of the circus was a nasty guy who whipped everybody, even when they got stuff right. All the freaks hated him, but he was so big and mean, nobody said anything, until one day he whipped me once too often, and I turned into a wolf and bit his head off. Everybody cheered, and I was made the new owner. It was a pretty good daydream. Then a few minutes before break, the door opened and guess who walked in? Steve! His mother was behind him and she said something to Mrs. Quinn, who nodded and smiled. Then Mrs. Leonard left and Steve strolled over to his seat and sat down. Where were you? I asked in a furious temper. At the dentist's, he said. I forgot to tell you I was going. What about? That's enough, Darren, Mrs. Quinn said. I shut up instantly. At break, Tommy, Alan and me almost smothered Steve. We were shouting and pulling at him at the same time. Did you get the tickets? I asked. Were you really at the dentist's? Tommy wanted to know. Where's my flyer? Alan asked. Patience, boys, patience, Steve said, pushing us away and laughing. All good things come to those who wait. Come on, Steve, don't mess us around, I told him. Did you get them or not? Yes and no, he said. What does that mean? Tommy snorted. It means I have some good news, some bad news, and some crazy news, he said. Which do you want to hear first? Crazy news? I asked, puzzled. Steve pulled us off to one side of the yard, checked to make sure no one was about, then began speaking in a whisper. I got the money, he said, and sneaked out at 7 o'clock when Mum was on the phone. I hurried across town to the ticket booth, but do you know who was there when I arrived? Who? We asked. Mr. Dalton, he said. He was there with a couple of policemen. They were dragging a small guy out of the booth. It was only a small shed, really, when suddenly there was this huge bang and a great cloud of smoke covered them all. When it cleared, the small guy had disappeared. What did Mr. Dalton and the police do? Alan asked. Examined the shed, looked around a bit, then left. They didn't see you, Tommy asked. No, Steve said. I was well hidden. So he didn't get the tickets, I said sadly. I didn't say that. He contradicted me. You got them? I gasped. I turned to leave, he said, and found the small guy behind me. He was tiny and dressed in a long cloak which covered him from head to toe. He spotted the flyer in my hand, took it, and held out the tickets. I handed over the money and... You got them? We roared delightedly. Yes, he beamed. Then his face fell. But there was a catch. I told you there was bad news to remember. What is it? I asked, thinking he'd lost them. He only sold me 2, Steve said. I had the money for 4, but he wouldn't take it. He didn't say anything, just tapped the bit on the flyer about certain reservations, then handed me a card which said the Cirque du Freak only sold 2 tickets per flyer. I offered him extra money. I had nearly £70 in total, but he wouldn't accept it. He only sold you 2 tickets, Tommy asked, dismayed. But that means, Alan began. Only 2 of us can go, Steve finished. He looked around at us grimly. 2 of us will have to stay at home.
Thanks for tuning in. You've been a part of John Smeaton's Regular